the sea. Wish I could be part of your world. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. I was too busy being a black mermaid. So, Disney has decided to create a live-action adaptation of The Little Mermaid, and they've cast a black woman to play the role of Ariel. I know what you're thinking. I should be excited. I should be absolutely overjoyed that Disney has finally come knocking at the black door. I get it. Black women and girls finally get to see ourselves represented as an iconic character on the big screen. So why do I feel so empty? I mean, I've done the costume and everything, but it's still really difficult for me to get excited. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Or maybe my leftist senses are tingling. Black Ariel, yas queen, yas.
Yeah.
Okay. Being a mermaid is really hard. Sure, you have fabulous hair and cool sea punk accessories, but you're also a perpetual outsider, forever caught between two worlds. The world of the surface is a tantalizing mystery that's forever out of reach. I mean, sure, you could go on land if you wanted, but you'll always be treated as an oddity and curiosity, and the people who you just want to befriend will be kind of scared of you. Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid is a story about an outsider looking in at its core. The story is about striving for acceptance in a world that is not your own, and the complexities surrounding the process of integration. The early European myths and folklore that inspired Hans Christian Andersen's story conjured the figure of the mermaid as an archetype used to represent the tensions that arise when different realities collide. In the Celtic hubs of Europe, there is a popular folk story about the mermaid Melusine. You know, the double-tailed mermaid that you see on your Starbucks cup. Yes, she's the one that I'm talking about, believe it or not. Hans Christian Andersen was inspired by this much darker and tragic outsider-themed legend. The story of Melusine perfectly encapsulated the psychological anxieties experienced by both outsiders and the dominant cultures they were attempting to assimilate. Melusine was a beautiful water nymph, living her #best life, until the king of the neighboring province spotted her bathing one day in a nearby river. He instantly fell in love with her and asked her to be his bride. She agreed to marry the king on the condition that he avoided entering her chambers on Saturdays, and made him swear to keep his promise. The king agreed, but soon his curiosity piqued. Rumors of infidelity and witchcraft filled the court. His new wife's outsider status stirred suspicion as to what activities kept her from her royal duties every Saturday. Once the king's anxiety reached its limit, he broke his marriage promise to Melusine and entered her chambers on Saturday to see what she was hiding. What Melusine was trying to hide was her true form. On Saturday, she transformed into a monstrous half-serpent or half-fish, depending on the source, half-human creature that needed her scales to be cooled in a giant tub of water. When the king discovered Melusine's secret,
he was horrified and banished her to the vast Atlantic oceans. He could not accept his wife's true form, and her attempts to integrate into human society were thwarted as soon as her magical form was realized. The Melusine legend ends in tragedy and rejection.
The Celtics worshipped Melusine as a goddess, and she became an archetype associated with the outcast and those rejected by society. Hans Christian Andersen drew from many of the different forms of the Melusine folklore in order to create a more child-friendly version of the story that Disney later adapted into the classic that we all know today. In a way, it sort of makes sense that Disney has decided to cast a black woman in the role of Ariel. It makes a lot of sense that they would choose somebody who comes from a group that is marginalized to portray the role of this archetype.
The conversation around black representation in Hollywood movies is perhaps a quintessential example of the tensions that arise when a group that has been othered by the dominant culture attempts to fight to be represented positively within it. The idea is that positive images of minority groups in media will increase the self-esteem of marginalized people and increase their cultural appeal and capital.
There have been a myriad of studies about poor representation versus good representation and how this psychologically affects black children and the way they view themselves in relation to society. I'm not immune to this. I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, and to be honest, positive and empowering representations of black women specifically were quite rare.
Give a little shout out to Aunt Viv.
Aunt Viv from fucking Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. They replaced her with fucking light-skinned Aunt Viv. There was
OG Aunt Viv.
OG Aunt Viv. There's dark-skinned.
Yeah.
Shout out to Aunt Viv from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I internalized a lot of insecurities and unhealthy beauty standards and hang-ups around my personality because of this lack of role models.
In a sense, like Ariel in The Little Mermaid, wanting to be a part of that world is the main appeal when minority groups voice demands for representation. When you are on the outside looking in, when the dominant culture shuts you out, it's easy to feel unseen, unheard, and unwanted. It creates a desperation for one's humanity to be validated by those who are in control of the cultural hegemony.
When the casting for Disney's new live-action adaptation of The Little Mermaid was announced, there was a lot of excitement from black and socially progressive fans about the prospect. However, there was a really ugly pushback from racists and conservatives about the idea of a black Ariel.
The internet was littered with racist memes depicting the actress as an old-school minstrel or an antiquated Disney racial caricature. Racists and conservatives complained about liberals shoehorning and woke-washing of a beloved franchise, and the discourse inevitably devolved into slander and hatred towards the actress. All this occurred despite the fact that mermaids are archetypically representative of outsiders and those who have been shunned by society. The mermaid archetype is also not limited to European folklore. The mermaid or siren is also a major fixture within the mythology, folklore, and religions of West Africa. Yemoja, the Yoruba mother goddess of the sea, is often depicted as a mermaid goddess, and Oshun, the Yoruba goddess of beauty and wealth, is also depicted as a freshwater siren. The Mami Water marine spirits are also a popular West African folklore deity that appear in African mythology and fiction. These goddesses followed enslaved Africans across the Atlantic and became important cultural, spiritual, and artistic figures in America, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe. To this day, these siren goddesses are evoked as powerful representations of the divine feminine principle in Black American popular culture. Beyoncé's Lemonade is a popular example of the singer using the Oshun/mermaid archetype as an empowering symbol for Black women.
The backlash towards the idea of a Black Ariel isn't really rooted in anything cultural or historical or mythological. What we are actually witnessing when we see pushback against this sort of thing is the dominant culture pushing back against the idea that Black people want to be a part of that world. Racism has always been the justifying ideology for class division, and the word Black has always been code for worker, slave, or poor. It's an important line, because I think people think racism exists just because for fun. Like the stories of Melusine and Ariel, it is an affront to the status quo to desire true acceptance. In order to become part of the monoculture, you're forced to give something up or conceal certain parts of yourself.
The question stops being about how well you are represented, but it becomes a question of at what cost will you be represented? Are you willing to surrender parts of your humanity? We live under capitalism after all, and it distorts our desire to be seen, exploits us, and waters down anything free, expressive, or subversive. Have you ever wondered why so many of the things that were once seen as edgy or subversive seem so normie and straight edge now? Are you confused as to why so many of the tactics that political and cultural movements of the past employed hold little to no weight in the present era? Well, it's because of the process of recuperation.
Recuperation is the process by which capitalism, the ruling ideology, consumes and regurgitates anything that could be subversive towards its aims. This, unfortunately, does not exclude things like racial and social justice. It is beneficial for the status quo to present the image of inclusion in order to distract minorities from deeper and more pressing material issues. It's a form of tepid acceptance that we see in culture over and over again, masquerading as social progress. The major tragedy of The Little Mermaid is that Ariel is coerced into giving up the thing that makes her unique in return for the chance to fit in.
Ariel surrenders her voice in return for legs. She is given the opportunity to participate in the dominant culture, so long as she remains a silent and watered-down version of herself. If we take this metaphor to its extreme, Ariel is a minority, and the sea witch Ursula represents capitalism.
In order to assimilate and fit in, you must erase all that is deemed unpalatable to the status quo. You become decontextualized from your historical and cultural tethers in order to become perfect representation of your group for society to gawk at.
I mean, it's no accident that the legend of Melusine, a goddess associated with the outcast and downtrodden, has now become a pictorial representation of the Starbucks brand. This unconscious cultural process of recuperation is an inbuilt mechanism within the logic of neoliberalism.
Under this system of exchange, and yes, believe me, it's about exchange, every single one of us has internalized the logic of neoliberalism in one way or another. You can never really truly belong to the dominant culture, but you may have something that it wants, and so it asks you to give it up in order to fit in. We then fetishize it and make it our own, because in this system, we are all raised to consume. It's the only way that we know how to relate to cultures and affects that are not our own.
This thing of yours is nothing but a commodity in their world, and to exist within it, you have to constantly be less than what you are, also more of it at the same time.
This is the fucked up paradox that representation under neoliberal capitalism presents minorities with. You're forced to choose between authenticity and access. recuperation is really a form of cultural theft. When liberals bang on about cultural appropriation, what they're really mad about is recuperation, even though they may not actually know what they're talking about.
Liberals will express hostility towards individuals that belong to the dominant culture when they are participating in cultures that are not their own. But this is incredibly wrong-headed.
Individuals cannot recuperate. Only capital has the kind of power that can make something as innocent as cultural exchange exploitative. Thank you very much. I wish liberals understood this so they could stop yelling at white people with dreadlocks. Let them wear their fucking dreadlocks if that's what they want to do. Recuperation is about stealing the image of anything that is free or subversive or pure and repurposing it to fit the goals of the system. That kind of power is only really in the hands of corporations, advertising agencies, and so on, not in the hands of random individuals.
Recuperation is a structural defense mechanism. It is a passive-aggressive conquest of the prevailing order, and for some reason it never gets any real pushback. Part of this is due to a huge lack of class and structural analysis.
It perverts the intent for success and belonging, to make the slave want to be the master, to make the worker want to be the boss. This prevailing order makes us believe that the system cannot change, and that we should change our roles instead.
We see a manifestation of this neoliberal dream in the ending of Disney's Little Mermaid. Spoiler alert in case you've been living under a rock. Not only does Ariel get to keep her voice, she also gets to keep her legs and marry the prince.
Honestly, I think this kind of messaging is really harmful. And I see it all the time in media that's marketed towards minorities as representation. I guess that's why I'm skeptical and find it hard to get excited. Bitch. I don't really know what the Little Mermaid film will be like. For all I know, it could be really great. I'm just tired of being lied to. I'm just so tired of seeing shiny aspirational images that are supposed to appeal to my identity. But if you peel back the layers, more often than not, these messages are often concealing a deeper subservience to the status quo.
The social order has been built to keep true Black representation from happening, but it is ultimately allowing it to happen so that people do not become aware of that social order.
It's a concession to maintain supremacy rather than freedom. There is still a massive disparity of Black creative control in the film industry. More often than not, Black people do not own the means of our own cultural production.
It seems as if the culture is content to use the labor and aesthetic of Black culture to produce shiny aspirational images. Aspirational images can be a healthy thing, but they can also be an oppressive reminder when the material conditions that minority groups endure don't match up to the standards that are constantly being conveyed.
Honestly, I'm pretty fine with the idea of a Black Little Mermaid existing, as any sane person would be. And I'm sure there are many progressive-minded white people who are happy and take comfort in the idea that seeing something like this means that the world of 2020 is much better than the world of 1960. I just get depressed when I realize that social justice often isn't the driving force behind these decisions. Market logic is. It puts the concept of representation in a very precarious situation that could change with the whims of the consumer demographic. So what's a Black mermaid like me to do? Fuck off back into the sea? Or smoke copious amounts of California seaweed until the existential dread dissipates? The answer, as usual, is a structural one. I guess it just saddens me that we're all so caught up in images and aesthetics that very few of us are willing to question. I guess I just hate the fact that I'm constantly having my identity shoved up its own arse and sold back to me for profit.
Ariel is me. Ariel is you. Ariel is that kid who moves to a new neighborhood and is looking to make new friends. Ariel is the little black girl who wants to feel pretty like the princesses in her storybooks. Ariel is anyone who has ever been on the outside looking in. Melusine, Yemaya, Ariel, goddesses of the waves. Please tell me, just what the fuck is a black mermaid to do?